Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of our Tableau Tip Battle week. Today, we're going to be going through Tableau Prep tips. So my name is Sophie Sparks. I'm the community manager here at the Information Lab, and it's been my absolute pleasure to take you through our Tableau Tip Battles so far this week, starting with formatting tips on Monday, Zen tips on Tuesday, speed tipping yesterday, and today we're looking at Tableau Prep. From Monday, I'm based in London, so I am working from home with our national coronavirus lockdown policy in place. So apologies if you hear any weird noises coming off the busy London street. My home office overlooks, and wherever in the world you are dialing in from, I hope that you are having a good afternoon and also that you're staying healthy and safe. Today, I'm joined by 3 of my fantastic colleagues. These are all data schoolers: Jenny Martin, Tom Prowse, and Jack Parry. Now, Tableau Prep is not the tool everybody is familiar with in the Tableau suite of tools. Tableau Prep is a reasonably new addition to Tableau's tool set. It came out 2 years ago, I think, and it is Tableau's answer to data prepping. So cleaning and preparing data is no one's idea usually of a fun time. However, if you don't have a well cleaned up data set, you'll have no end of headaches when you start to try and do any sort of analysis with your data. So hopefully today you will learn to love cleaning up your data even more. It is a fun challenge. Think of it like a logic puzzle game. If you're somebody who likes Sudoku or crosswords, then you will like cleaning up data. So who are these great people who are going to be taking this through today? We have Jenny and Tom, both from Data School Cohort 14. And we have Jack from Data School Cohort 12. Now, Jenny and Tom are both part of the Prepping Data community. You may or may not know the Prepping Data challenges that are put out weekly, but I will link to them in the chat from this. And Jenny and Tom are both part of that. So they set challenges and they do them every week. So they are data prep experts. Jack from DS12 is another data prep fan. He started the first virtual Tableau data prep user group, which ran its first session in February and is looking to run its second session, I think sometime later this month or in early May. I'll link to the virtual Tableau prep user group. So if you're interested, do sign up to it and then you'll get notified as soon as Jack puts out the next date for their virtual Tableau prep user group. So without further ado, I will tell you what today is going to consist of. So Jenny, Tom, and Jack are going to battle it out, sharing a few tips each and grabbing the screens off each other and showing you some great shortcuts and ways to make Tableau Prep work for you even better. At the end of the session, we'll open up a vote. I want to know whose tips you thought were the most helpful. So we'll open that up to a vote, and then I'll let you know what's happening in tomorrow, our final Tableau tip day this week. So Jack, if you can unmute yourself and share your screen, we'll get started.
Okay, thanks Sophie for that introduction. To kick things off, I'm going to be talking through some tips on how you could perhaps input your data slightly better to Tableau Prep, just to speed up the process and some things you may not know existed in the first place. So usually to input some data, we'll go to the connections pane up here in the top left of the screen and add a connection of your choice. So you may want to connect to a file type or perhaps connecting to a database with the many options down here. What you can also do is drag in files straight from your file explorer. So in here, I've got a load of minimum wage files. I'm going to bring in this 2007 one, just drop it onto the canvas, and there we go. We've got our data straight into Tableau Prep. What you may have noticed in the file explorer was that there were lots of minimum wage files for lots of different years. So what is usually done to deal with this is perhaps bringing in all of the different files and then using a union tool to bring them together if they're all of the same structure. But what we can do in Tableau Prep is perform a wildcard union on the input tool. So if we go to our multiple files here, you'll see at the moment we're just bringing in a single table, but we can change this to a wildcard union and configure using the several options we have here. So this search in dropdown is going to be looking in the specific folder unions to, which is where the file came from. You can see here in the file explorer. And then below we've got all of the files that it's currently picking up. The reason it's got this customer data in here, as well as all the other files, is because we're searching to include anything at the moment. So you can see here we've got blank equals include all. So what we want to do is to update that to only bring in our minimum wage files. So what we can do is change our matching pattern in here. So we know that our minimum wage files are going to say minimum wage and then 2000 and something. So if we put an asterisk, that indicates a sort of wildcard match. So it's going to pull in anything after that 2000, the 20, anything can come after that. So if we hit apply, we can see that our included files has been updated to not include the customer data. If we hit apply again, then we'll see over here in the metadata that we have a new field called file path. And this indicates that the union has happened because it will add a field of each of the file names to the data set. If we just check that data, we can actually see that one of the files wasn't aligned correctly to the scheme of the rest of the data. So if we just click on one of these fields, so say Alaska, we can see that that was actually the 2008 file had its state field named as US state. That's why they're all over here. And we can see that state is null over here. One way to quickly get rid of that is to just drag our US state onto our state field. And then we've merged the two fields together. So now we've got our nice clean data set. You can see that from the changes over here. So the next tip I'm going to talk about is to do with when we've got large amounts of data coming into Tableau Prep. Now, if we're dealing with lots and lots of data all at the same time, it's going to slow down our flows a lot and put a lot of power, a lot of pressure on the processing of the flow. So I'm going to do another wildcard union on this Metropolitan Police Force data. And so at the moment, I'm just looking in this 2015 December folder. But if I go to London Crimes and include subfolders, it's going to look in every single folder within London Crimes. And we can just do, so I know that all of those files are the same, but what we could do is just put in Metropolitan Street and put an asterisk either side, just to make sure that we're not bringing in any extra files. And if we hit apply, we can still see we've got our 36. And if we hit apply again, we can see down here that we've got our file paths. Now, if we go to clean this data, because we're bringing in several years worth of data, there's going to be a lot of rows. We don't necessarily want to we don't want to deal with all of those rows all at once. So we can see here, we've got nearly 360,000 rows of data. So what we can do in our input configuration with this option to sample the data. Now, by default, you have this default sample amount setting, which Tableau Prep essentially looks at your file and will adjust the sample accordingly. So if you have a large number of fields or lots and lots of rows, it might put that sample on for you. But with my data set at the moment, it hasn't sampled anything. So what we can do is either use all the data or just a fixed number of rows. So I only want to see 2000 rows. So now when we go back, we'll see that that's run a lot quicker, and I've only got 2000 rows as indicated up here. You also have two different types of samples. So your quick select sample will always return the same sample of data each time, whereas you can actually change this to a random sample, which is a more thorough sample of the data, but as you can see, it may impact performance because each time Tableau Prep has to go back and get a different 2000 rows. But we can see that in action by, I'll just go back to here a few times. We can see that at the moment, we're bringing back the December 2015. If we go to this again and go back, we've now got January 2016. So it's pulled back a different sample of data with that random sampling. Some other tips for your inputting. We can rename some fields from the metadata pane over here. So if we just double click in a field name, you can change crime type to just type. You can also filter your data straight from the off by maybe if we only wanted to look at a certain type of offence, we can just put in our type equals public order. And if we hit apply, we can see now that our changes have been noted in here by these indicators, and we can see that our sample values for crime type only public order is coming back. So this can speed up your analysis if you know how you want to prep your data even before you bring it into Tableau Prep. The final little trick I'm going to talk about with inputting is when we have a slightly messy Excel file that someone has formatted for us. So we can see here that we've got field 1, field 2, field 3, field 4, and we've got what looks like a title. Someone might have put in a title to the spreadsheet. And if we just preview that, we can see that's the case. Here, we've got all our values below, but this is not what we want the data to look like. You might spend some time trying to clean this up yourself, but what you can do is use this button, Use Data Interpreter, which can be used with Excel files, CSVs, PDFs, and Google Sheet inputs. And Tableau Prep will have a preview of your data and try and clean it for you before you have to do any of that messy manual work yourself. So as you can see, it's just looking at the file with this spinning icon up here. And here we go. It's cleaned with our data interpreter, and we've got a nice clean file. And the last thing we want to do is we want to change the data type of this staff ID. It is a number, but we want to use that as an identifier. So we're going to change that to a string. And we can see the change over here on the right. So that concludes my tips on inputting data. I'm going to hand over to Tom now. So Tom, you want to grab your screen off me?
Yep, give me 2 seconds. Right, here we go. So I'm going to talk all about filtering. So I know Jack mentioned a little bit about filtering when you were doing inputs, but when we go into our workflow, we put a clean step. Now I am using slightly different data. So all of mine is around support tickets. So we're in a support department, we've got a ticket ID, which department it came from, the employee, a timestamp, and then some other bits related to the ticket. So as you can see, there's a few nulls here. We've got a few different status types. So as an example, if we only wanted to see all of the cases which were open, so in other words, excluding the closed, we can just click on closed. As you can see, it's now highlighted in blue. And then back up here, we have an exclude button. Click exclude, and you can see that all of the fields here now do not include closed. So that's just filtered out them from our values. So there's a few other ways you can filter. That's probably the quickest, but it's quite manual. You have to go and select which fields that you want. You can also click on these 3 dots here on a different field. So if I was going to remove these null values, click on the 3 dots, and then I can go down to filter. From filter, you've got 4 different options. You've got calculation. So this is the one which Jack used earlier, where it was if it was equals to a value, or there's other more complex calculations. We've also got a few other options, one of which is null values. So if I click on null values, I get this nice blue dialog box coming up. with these two radio buttons. I can even press on non-null values, so that removes the nulls. If I was to click on nulls, that does the opposite. So for this one, I want to remove all the nulls, so I want to keep only the non-nulls. I can press done, and again, this has cleared up the null values from our fields there. The next one is we've got a few nulls and different bits on our timestamp. So just as a quick, just to show you this one. So we've got selected values, click select values, and then we can just select the null. Again, this is keep only, and we can go on to exclude as well. So again, these are all similar ways of filtering, but just different ways of doing it. And we go done. As you may have noticed, this is just March's data here, but it looks like it's pulling through some of February's results as well. However, we don't want these, so we want to filter the February results out. So again, 3 dots on the filter, and we've got 2 different options here. We've got a range of dates and a relative dates. So range of dates, you can choose from and a to date, but for this example, I'm just going to use relative dates. So you may be familiar with this within the Tableau desktop. You can use relative date filter. So again, along the top here, we've got our different date parts. So if we choose months, and then I want to choose the previous month. So this is just going to return all of our data from the 1st of March to the 31st of March. Now, obviously, this is going to update depending on your date. So for example, once we go into May, then this is going to return the previous months, which would be April's data. So you may want to be careful when using this. However, if I press done, now you can see all of our dates are just from March, removing all of the ones from February. The next type of filter that I'm going to use is a bit more of a complicated contained with a calculation. So as you can see, all of our departments here, some of them include stores, some of them include warehouses, and also the head office. So as an example here, I'm going to go onto filter, and we can use calculation. So this time I'm going to use a contains calculation. So we can have contains. So we want within our department field, we want it to contain warehouse. So this is going to filter every field which contains the word warehouse. So if I press save here, you can see it only filters for the ones which we want, which contain warehouse. However, we want this to be slightly different. So if we open up the changes panel just on the side here, this is a list of all of the changes that we've made so far. So you can see all of our different filters. If we double click on this one, so we want the opposite of this to happen. So we only want to filter out the ones with warehouse. So if we go equals false and then press save, you can see the inverse of this has now happened. And we have a nice list with excluding the warehouse. My next one is a little bit more complicated, and it's using joins as a filter. So as you can see, we've brought in a different file here, which contains just our head office departments. So this is excluding the stores and the warehouses. So this time I'm going to join this to the original flow. So if I hold down my left click and then drag it over the first clean, you can notice we've got a union and a join. And when I hover over the join, it changes color. So if I release it there, now this has made the join. Now Tableau sometimes adds a join clause for you, but in this time it can't recognize anything. So we'll have to do it ourselves. So we're going to choose department from our first clean and then head office department from our second. Now you can notice this is an inner join, and we've also got a few values which have been included, which is good, but also some which have been excluded. So essentially been filtered out. These values are also shown on the side here within red. So you can see that the ones which have been filtered out are not contained within our original list of head office departments. So if I add a clean step, and there we go. We only have our nice clean departments here. So as you may have noticed as well, we can also have some limits here. So this could be anything which you want, but for this example, we're going to use, we only want to return the severity between the lower limits and the upper limits. So for example, we have severities here of 1 to 5. So again, we could join this again, dragging it up. So again, seeing how notice Tableau has now got the upper limit and lower limit. We don't quite want this. So if we clear that and then add a new one, we want to go on department and head office department. And we can also use the plus here. We also want severity. And before we choose lower limit, we can also change how it's calculated here. So at the moment, it's just equal, but with the drop down, we can use this to not equal, greater than, and less than. So we're going to choose if the severity is greater than or equal to our lower limit, and also if the severity is less than or equal to our upper limit. Now, as you can see, there's a few more which have been reduced here. So being filtered out, so the ones in red. But if I then click on our next clean step, and we see our severity, we now have the severity of 2, 3, and 4, which is just the ones between our original limits back on our data set that we've input. So these can then be changed, for example, outside of Tableau Prep within a Excel field, and then this will automatically filter to whatever is in this lookup table. So in terms of joins, in terms of filters, that's all of my tips for the moment. And I'm going to pass on to Jenny, who's going to take you through the next ones.
Thank you very much, Tom. Just let me share my screen. Cool, I hope you can all see that now. So my topic for this chunk is going to be generic tips about workflows. So you've inputted your data, you've filtered it, and you're aware you're building a massive workflow, and it's getting out of control, and you're starting to think, oh, how am I going to hand this over to someone? How am I going to remember what I did even tomorrow? You know, sometimes it's difficult to come back to these things. So just to give you some tips as to how you can make that the best process possible. So I'm using for my data, again, it's slightly different. I'm using Prep and Data Solutions because these are the data sets that I'm quite familiar with, being part of the Prep and Data team. So this one is from this year, and it's from the 3rd week, and it's come from the mind of Jonathan Allenby, one of our fellow Dr. Preppers, and it's quite a monster, so don't be put off by this one. This is definitely on the harder scale of Prep and Data challenges. But something that jumps out immediately at me is this little input here. Oh, it's so annoying how that's not aligned, but I can easily drag it down so that it is in line, and that makes me feel a lot better immediately. So that's my first tip, is rearranging workflows to make them look however you want, and you can do it with big chunks of the workflow or one step at a time, anything like that, just to make it look a little bit better and how you want it to look. You may also notice here that I've got different colors for different sections of the workflow, because this is quite a big workflow. I've been able to color code it so that it splits up into different chunks. So there's this inputting step, then we do 3 different steps that kind of break off, and then we scroll along, we've got our end steps here. So they're all colored nicely, but how do you do that? You can right click on any step individually and change the color of it. I didn't actually click on a color then, that was helpful. So there you go. Or, I mean, I have to change it back now. Or you can highlight lots of them at once and change the colors all together. So maybe we want this one to be gray instead. And then that's just a nice visual way to break up the different sections of your workflow to indicate to yourself at a later date, to a colleague who's picking up your workflow, that these are the different separate chunks that you need to sort of consider as one. And I find that really useful for myself to go back and see how these things fit together. So that's kind of 2 tips for you. The next tip is, wasn't it annoying when I had to scroll all the way along the bottom here because my workflow's got a bit long? So how do I see it all at once? Well, if I come down to this little panel at the bottom here, then I can just click on this little zoom out section, and you get all the workflow, no matter what size it is, shrunk down to one size. And then I can sort of see everything at a top overview. this isn't obviously good for seeing detail. For seeing detail, I might want to be on like 100%. So I can just click on the numbers there and great, I have my 100% zoomed in workflow. Another cool thing that you can do, if I just click on a step randomly here, then you can use this little caret up arrow to sort of hold down and zoom around to different sections of your workflow. So that's really nice and handy to be able to do that. But do you know what frustrates me? If I come to the end step here, then I'm kind of in the middle here, but it's covering up my last step. So that's really frustrating. I kind of want the step that I'm working with to be in the middle of my canvas. So I actually got this tip from one of my colleagues, Tim, and if you just add a clean step after that and then drag it along to the right-hand side of your canvas until that step's sort of a bit more in the middle, then that makes it a lot nicer in my mind to be building, because you're not trying to build against sort of the end of the canvas. It makes it seem like you've got so much more room to build and to add changes. And I know that as a matter of personal preference. I know when I was discussing that tip with Jack and Jonathan, they thought that was ridiculous, but I think that's a great tip. So let me know if you agree. So now that we've got this extra long canvas that we've got, then if we want to keep building, then we go to our plus and we add a clean step, and that's not really what we want. We don't want our clean step to branch off. We want it to go along the nice straight line. So if I delete that, then let me just, yeah, there we go. Then you'll notice that we were hitting the plus here, right next to the step. Whereas if we hover along the branch, then we get this little plus sign come up sort of in between steps, if you like. And then if we insert a clean step here, then it actually puts it on that branch line in line with our previous steps, which that's much nicer and will make us much happier because it's all sort of flowing nicely. So just to show you that that can happen anywhere. So in between this join and this clean step, much smaller branch, but I can still add in a clean step and it will shift everything along. So that's good. That took me a while to work out actually, that you can add steps like that anywhere back in your workflow to make some changes where you might have had new requirements to change. So that's definitely helpful in my opinion. So now we've got the data profile up at the moment, then you'll probably be familiar with how cool it is. As Tom was showing you earlier, when you click on just a team, for example, you can see all of the bits, all the fields where that team is currently in. I'm not explaining that very well, but it's just profiling your data so you can see your data much more clearly than if it's just looking like a table. Because if you click on this bit here, oh, I should probably unselect my team so that we see all of our data, then you just kind of get a table. And there are circumstances where you might just be wanting to look at it on a row by row basis. So that's a handy thing to be able to switch to. But then another good thing that you can switch to as well is just having a list of the field names. So that's useful for just sort of getting the metadata. As Jack was showing you, it looks quite similar to when you're inputting the data. And you've even got this changes column here as well, which is useful. I find this most useful when you're joining some data together. So let's go to this join, for example. And you can see that we're joining on teams. So if we're looking at it like this at the moment, then you can see that the team from one of the join, so the team from here and the team from here, you get both of them coming through into your results. And you can see that it just duplicates that column, and that's not very useful. So you might want to just be able to just quickly delete the additional team that's coming through. And I always like to switch to that view just to see where I've got the duplicates, because scrolling along here, you might miss them because they're a bit subtle, how it just has the date and then date -1 in brackets next to it. So that's another good use for these sort of different views and how you might want to use them. So I'm going to switch to a different Prep and Data Challenge now. This one is week 42, and I'm going to just show you a bit of a different tip here. So we've got our location data here. Now, if we want to just clean this up a little bit, then I'm just going to do a little split. We can see it's the city and then a comma and then the country. So I just want the country for now. So I'm just going to split that off. Now, that's kind of helpful. We've got the country there. We can see that we've got some values that aren't actually countries. So I'm just going to like hover over them, control, hold down and exclude them using that filtering technique that Tom showed us. And then these are definitely both countries now. Now, if I right click on this and preview it in Tableau Desktop, then it'll just take a minute for Tableau Desktop to open up for me. And we can see that this is our field at the moment, the location split one. And say we kind of want a map out of that, to a map view of our locations at the moment. It's quite difficult working out how we're going to do that. Like, that's not very useful. We can, of course, in Tableau, come to here and change geographic role, etc. and so forth. But why do it in Tableau Desktop? Why not take all of the, make it nice and easy for our end users in desktop by changing it in Tableau Prep instead? And in fact, we've actually got a nice little recommendation from Tableau Prep telling us to do exactly that, to change the data role to country/region. So I can either hit apply there, or I can go into my little data type here and change it myself. So there's those two different ways of how to do that. And now, hopefully, when I preview it in Tableau Desktop, I might just rename it as well, so that that makes it nice and helpful for Tableau to know what I'm trying to do. If I preview that in Tableau Desktop, then it's going to hopefully have a little geographic globe symbol next to it, which it does. So now when I double click on that in Tableau Desktop, then I get a nice map easily. I don't even have to think about how I'm going to clean my data because it's already clean. So let me see if I've got any more tips for this section. I do. So if we're looking down here, then I'm doing a lot of similar things, all in one step. And if I was thinking about how I might name this step to explain to people what's going on, then I'm doing some splitting up of location, I'm cleaning the location of the city and the country, and I'm doing quite a lot of changes, like 9 changes in one step. That's not necessarily the best way to do it. So if I was trying to name this step, I might struggle to explain what I was doing. So we could like split up this step into a couple of different steps. So we're doing what we did before, we're adding our steps into the middle of the flow. Maybe I want to say that this is splitting, and then this one could be cleaning the country, clean country, and this one could be cleaning the city. Then I'm using these annotations that you can see to show either my future self or whoever's picking up my work what I'm actually doing. If I want to go into a bit more detail, I can add a little description down here as well. Cleaning location is what I'm going to call it. Not the most useful, but this is just demo. And I can even turn these little descriptions on and off so that that's helpful for anyone picking up my work later. Now, I haven't actually done the splitting up of those changes, but I will do that when I come back for my next tip session in a few moments' time. So stick around for that. And for now, I'm going to hand over to Jack again. So thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Let me just get my screen back up. Okay, so some tips I'm going to give now, looking at how you could do stuff that you're already doing, but perhaps slightly quicker. So I'm going to start off with this sales data. We can see here that if we preview the data with a clean step, this is not really the format that we'd want our data in. We've got all these month fields, month and year fields across lots of different columns. We'd prefer our data to be thinner and longer. We want all these month and year fields to be in one field, so we could plot them on an axis in Tableau. So what we need to do there is to pivot the data. So we can add a pivot step. And we've got all our fields over here on the left. And what you can do is drag them across, and then you'll see which fields we're pivoting in the preview pane over here. Given we've got quite a lot of fields that we want to pivot, and they're all in a similar structure, in a similar name format, sorry, we can use this wildcard search to pivot, similar to what we were doing with our wildcard input for inputting multiple files. So we can see a similar structure in the field names, in that we tend to have the month, and then we have an underscore and then a year. So what we could do is we could put an underscore 20, as that's common to all of our fields that we want to pivot. We don't want to pivot region. And then we can use these 3 dots to just check our option that we want to search for. So at the moment, this is set up as we'd like it. So we want to see if the field contains these values, but you could change that to that the field starts with this or it ends with. So I'm going to hit enter, and there we go. We've picked up all those fields and left region where it was. Now, what's good about using this as well is that it will future-proof your workflow. So if we knew someone was going to add some more fields in there in the future, we can see here that we're up to April at the moment, but say we had May come in, so someone's inputted their data to have the May values, and they've saved this. If we come into Tableau Prep and we refresh our flow, we've now got it's automatically picked up May 2020 into our pivot fields. So then we're going to rename these fields as sales and date. And we've got our nicely pivoted values, which is going to be dynamic going forward as people add to that Excel file. So the next tip I'm going to talk about is just how you could speed up an aggregate. So what we've got over here, we've got our fields we can group by, and we've got our measures that we might want to sum up. So we're going to look at average sales by region. So we're going to put region into our grouped fields. And you can see here that Tableau Prep knows that sales is a measure, and it's going to try and sum it. And what we could do is drag it across, and we could change the aggregation using this drop down. But how you could speed that up is just by clicking here. You get all of the aggregations you might want to perform from this drop down, and if we just select average, it will automatically take it over. So moving on to the staff data, we can see here we've got lots of fields. It's got quite a lot going on in it, and 21 fields. And sometimes when you're looking at this profile pane, you might get a bit lost looking for your fields. So what you can do is use this search bar. So I know there's a couple of name fields in there. So I'm going to search for name, and then I can very quickly find those fields. So I want to combine my first name and my last name. Instead of searching around by dragging that pane back and forth, you can just search them pretty easily. So a few more. If we come into our customer data here, we've got some information about customer purchases. We can see down here, but the data is not quite how we would like it. So quickly, as I showed before earlier, when you're inputting the data, you can also change the data type up here. So at the moment, it thinks our customer ID is a number, which it is, it's correct, but that's an identifier. So we want to change that to a string. So we can quickly change that to a string field there. Otherwise, you may be typing out a calculation that is converting that number to a string. Something else that we can do is, which might speed up your prepping, is if you're creating a calculated field based off a field you already have, but you want to just overwrite that field, if we just save it as the same name, then it will overwrite the pre-existing field. So instead of creating another field for gender and then deleting the old one, you can just overwrite it. So if we wanted to change our F and M's to male and female, so we can do if gender equals F, then female, male, and if we hit apply, you'll see that that's just overwritten our previous field. It hasn't created a new one. Some other quick cleanup tips we can look at. We've got this transaction ID field, which looks like it's a bit of a mess. What we really want out of this transaction ID is the 5 numbers in the middle. But with some poor data entry, this has been messed up. So what we could do, we might start trying to rip this string apart using some regex or some string calculations. But Tableau Prep has got some really nice cleaning features. So if we go into our 3 dots here, we've got these cleaning options. And so we just want our numbers. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove any letters. So we can now see we're left with our colon and our numbers. And then again, we can go back in, add another clean step, and remove punctuation. And very easily, you've got to your transaction ID without having to use some complex calculations. The final tip I've got for you in this session is that we've got our purchase date time field here. So this looks at the date and the hour and the minute that these customers made a purchase. Sometimes we might not want to look at the exact time of a purchase, but we may still want this field as a date time field. So how can we get rid of those minutes and hours quickly? So what we can do is just combine 2 date functions to get rid of them, the hour and minute field pretty quickly. So what we can do is we can wrap our purchase date time in a date. So this will just truncate the date time field to our date value. And then if we still want it to be a date time field, we can just wrap that in a date time, which will convert all the hours and minutes to 00. So if we save that, now we have a clean date time field without the minutes and hours specified. So that's all my tips in this session. I'm going to hand back over to Tom now. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Jack. So now my tips are all going to be about features which are quite unique to Prep and are really useful. So I'm using the same data source as I was previously. So just to keep everything all nice and familiar with everyone. So as you've noticed, within the department, we've got some stores, we've got some head office departments, and we've got a warehouse as well. So for this, if we just wanted all of our stores to be grouped together, and just, for example, calling it store, we can hold down Control and then make a multi-select just here. So now I've got all 4 of my stores selected. Now, if I want to group these all together just into one field and call it store, I can right-click, and then we have an option down here for group. I can press group, and Tableau automatically groups all of these together. Now, it's called it Wimbledon Store. However, you can change this by deleting and any text and then entering whatever text you like. Press enter, and as you can see, there's a little paperclip icon here, and it's grouped together all of our stores and it renamed them store, which is really useful when you're doing some data prep and cleaning your work. So there's some more grouping functions which Tableau have as well, Tableau Prep has. So we've got a few spelling mistakes here. So we've got finance, marketing, we've got product design, and we've also got sale and sales. So without having to do this manually each time, we can use the group and replace functions. So what we've just done is the manual selection. There's also a pronunciation one. So if we click pronunciation, you can see we get this little slider here. So this is how sensitive we want the groupings to be. So if we bring us down to the lowest level here, as you can see, it hasn't quite picked up the finance, but down on product design, there's the paperclip icon. So if we click on that, you can notice that the Tableau Prep has recognized that product design and product des are probably the same thing. So it's grouped them together and renamed it. Now, if we increase the sensitivity slightly, you can see another paperclip has appeared here. So we now have marketing and marketing all grouped together. However, if we grew, just for example, take this up to the highest one. Okay, it's picked up finance and sales, but we've also got one for project management now, where it's not quite working as we would want it. So if we just move this back down, we've picked up that. So we press OK and then done. So we've got our marketing, we've got our product design, we just need our sales and our finance ones to be cleaned. So if we use the group and replace, this time common characters, So this is another one. This time there's no sensitivity, but as you can see, we've got finance and we've got sales, and they've all been put into one group and cleaned up nicely for us. So that's the common characters grouping. Now, this is all quite long and quite kind of manual for each step. So if I just remove these last two filters, one way which we can group these all together, just in this case, is via spelling. So if I choose this, you can notice it's on the second sensitivity, and we've got finance, we've got marketing, we've got product design, and we've got sales, and that's all in one step. Obviously, we need to be wary of this because Tableau Prep could pick up some fields which we don't want grouped, but as a quick fix to this solution here, it works really well. My next tip is just on automatic splitting. So we've got the employee field here, but it's first name and last name all together. So if we want to quickly split this out into two fields, we can do here. We have split values, automatic split. You can see that we have two new fields, one for the first name, which we can rename, and we also have last name. You can see Tableau automatically splits out our employee into the two fields with the space. So that's a real time saver instead of doing any calculations. Next one I'm going to go on to is actually a new feature which was released in Tableau Prep earlier this year. So let's delete that one. If I have another clean step just to make it a lot easier. So if I just view one of our tickets here, as you can see, we have the same ticket ID on multiple rows, and each time the status is updated, it brings through another row. So we want to find out when this ticket was logged. So we just want this ticket here, but we can only get that from one row. So we can't do multiple calculations across rows. However, with the new features on the calculations, we've got a fixed LOD. So you may be familiar with this with inside Tableau Desktop. So if I choose the fixed LOD, we get this new nice blue dialog box again. So this time, similar to when we use it in Tableau Prep, what do we want to group by? So for each ticket ID in our case, and then what calculation do we want to do? So we want to find the minimum of the timestamp. So what's the earliest date for each of these ticket IDs? So if I press done, you can see this is now fixed LOD. We can double click to rename, so earliest date. And now for each row of our ticket IDs, let's make this a bit bigger. You can see this is our earliest date, and it's now repeated on each row. So then we can do date difference calculations and other things related to this, which is really useful, which we couldn't do in previous versions of Tableau Prep. Another feature which has just been released along with the fixed LOD is a ranking. So for example, if I wanted to rank all of our dates from the earliest to the most recent date, I can use rank. Again, we get this nice blue dialog box. This time, we don't want to group by anything. So we just want to go through across the whole table. We can use rank. So we've got a couple different types of rank. So in this chart, in this example, I'm going to use dense rank. Then we can choose our field. We've got earliest date. And you can notice there's actually a ZA or an A to Z. So if I click this, this is going to go from our earliest to our latest, which is great. It's what we want. Press done. And now you can see we've got a ranking for each of our dates, which is maybe this isn't too useful in this example, but if we were going to use it with sales data or kind of performance, we can then rank our salespeople or anything similar to that. So it's a really powerful feature. My final tip is just relating to parsing and converting dates. This is, again, it's another new feature. So instead of, if we just want to, if I click on detail, you can see each of our dates here. You can see it's kind of days, months, years, and time. So for example, if we just wanted to see what month or which week our date is, so we can pick month number. And it's errored. Oh no. The demo gods have got me. If I just put an aggregate in here quickly, this is just on the fly. So if I go for a group by our rank, group by our ticket ID, and if we go for our earliest date as well, and add a clean step. And now if I try to do our date conversion, we can go, if we want to see just the month number, we can click month. And as you can see, for each of our dates, it's now converted for a month. Notice this does overwrite our actual date, so we may need to duplicate a field first if we want to keep our dates. So that's all of my unique to prep tips, and I think I'm going to hand over to Jenny, who's going to go over the last step.
Cool, thank you, Tom. So I'm going to be talking all about changes in this last little tip session. So Jack and Tom have mentioned changes quite a lot and how useful this panel can be. So I'll just go into a little bit more detail about all the useful things that you can do with that. So at the end of my last section, I was talking about how it's nice to split our steps into smaller chunks so that it's easier to hand over a workflow, pick up a workflow, investigate what's going wrong in a workflow, and therefore having 9 changes in one step is quite a lot. So if we're kind of retrospectively trying to split out our changes into different steps, then how can we do that easily? Do we have to rewrite each thing? Well, no, actually, because you can copy and paste steps. So if I just copy from there and paste it to there, then you can see that it's erroring because we've already made the change there, so we'd have to then go back and delete it. But if I just do that with a couple of these, hopefully they're all in the right order. I don't know if I checked this. That wasn't the cleverest. Then if I just do this a little bit more, then I'm just going to delete those changes from the first step, and you'll see those little exclamation marks disappear because it'll be able to flow through and make sense of it. So now that we've done that splitting in our first step, where we're literally just splitting out our location here into the 2 steps that we were doing, then we're cleaning everything related to the country, then we're cleaning everything related to the city. And all that I would need to do is also rename the country and the city here for it to be properly cleaned as it was before I split it up. So you may have noticed with that cleaning that I can click through my changes and see where we are at each step of that change. So if I was at this earlier step, for example, and I realized I wanted to do something before this change occurred, then I can just click here and say I want to create a new calculated field. We're just duplicating this field in this example. Then that happens before this later change, and that's not a problem to add a change before. And if I then wanted this one, maybe I didn't want that to happen there. After all, I've made a mistake, I can drag it down and it can happen at the end instead. So that's some useful ways that you can play with the changes that you're making. So you can not only see them, but you can interact with them, play with them, copy and paste them to different steps in your workflow, and just make the best use possible out of them. So another thing to think about there, we've got all these changes. If I want to edit those changes, so we saw when Tom was talking about the automatic splitting, that it creates these changes here. Like we haven't written this calculated field when we did that split, it's just created it. So the calculation that's brought up, we can see in this example, let me just show you, sorry, that it's taking this store potential sales field, which has a numeric value, and then the currency, and it's got space in between there. So when we're splitting that up, when we're getting the first field back, it's able to Tableau's smart enough to change it into a number. And we can see that's being done because it's wrapped it in an integer here. But maybe we don't want that to happen. Maybe it was like in the other examples we've seen, where sometimes numbers are used as identifiers, and we don't want that to happen. So we can just delete the the part where it's changing our string field to an integer, and then we can see that it changes back to being a string. So in this case, that's not what we want to do, but it's just an example of how no matter what's happening, you can go back and change it. So I'm going to move back to our week 3 challenge again, because I just have a nice bit of regex that is already in this challenge to show you. So in this example, we've got some dates and we've got some times. And you can see that we've got a little P next to most of our times to indicate that it's in the afternoon. Now, to clean this up initially, I'm doing a remove letters like Jack showed to get rid of those letters. But say I kind of wanted to keep this information. I wanted to know what letters I was removing. So instead of that, I might double click on this calculation here that Tableau has automatically done for me when we did the whole, clean remove letters. But instead, maybe I want to do a regex extract instead. So if I type in extract there, and then we don't even have to think about what the regex is, it's already written for us. We just need to make sure that we put the little brackets around the outside to let Tableau know that this is the capture group, this is what we want to return. And let's call it a new field. Let's say start ET and then letters, just so that we're keeping that information, it's not disappearing for us. Okay, that has not given us the field, but let me just copy that a second and create a new calculated field with that information in. Save that there. Then you can see that that's what has happened then. And I don't know what's gone wrong with that change step, but we'll just add that in afterwards. So there you go. We've used what Tableau automatically generates as its regex expression to extract that information and then also remove it without really having to think about or understand regex too much, which is quite nice and quite a nice feature and quite a nice way to make use of those changes panel. So I've got one last tip for you, and it's coming from week 5 of prepping data. And you will have seen Tom just do a rank. So he was doing a dense rank. So there were a few options of different types of ranks that you could do that Tom was able to show us. But what if we want to do the modified competition rank? That isn't an option in the dropdown, and I'll prove that to you now. But how can we use the change panel to help us out there? So in this example, we're doing a rank on the diff. So if we come down to create a calculated field again and do the rank, then we can see if we go on detail here, that when we get to 10, then it goes to 11, and there are 2 teams that are tied on 11 or 2 rows, and then it goes to 13, whereas we want it to go to 12 instead. Yeah, I think that's the way it works. Sorry, I might not have explained that very well. But then when we come over to here, we don't have a modified rank option. So if we just kind of close that and say done, then we can create a calculated field and kind of copy the syntax of how this works. Because if we search for the rank function here, then we can see that we've got a modified rank there. So we can just use the example over here to type out what we want. So we can order by diff, that's exactly what we want, in a descending order, and we want to calculate the rank modified. So we can just scroll down to that. And that's another example of how we can use the changes that Tableau does automatically to create what we actually want. Because now if we look on detail, we can see that that's doing the modified competition rank just as we want it to. So that's all the tips that I have for you on changes, and I hope you can see how useful they are. So I'll hand back over to Sophie for the end. Sophie? Cool. I think you might be on mute, Sophie.
I'm still on mute. Ah, double muted. This is just not my day today.
Don't worry, you're back.
I will. Okay, I'm glad you can all hear me. So I will repeat what I just said. I'm I apologize, and I'm very sorry that I started the incorrect stream. So some people weren't able to join right at the start. So some people may have missed some tips. So instead of going through asking you guys whose tips you thought were best, I'm going to quickly put a question through that came on the chat. So Jenny, Jack, and Tom, would you be able to say quickly tell us how quick update in how duplication removal feature works? And everyone, while you guys unmute yourselves, this will be links for the video for this will be posted online. I'll put it up on Meetup later on this afternoon, and Jenny, Jack, and Tom will all share their Tableau Prep workflows to be able to go through them. So, guys, how do you how does the duplication removal feature work?
So I can answer a quick one of this. Let me just show my screen. So there's a couple ways we can do this. Wait for it to load up. So going back to my ticket data just here. So if we bring a new branch up here, so this is a bit off the cuff. So we just want to return each of our stores. Our ticket IDs here, for example. We can use an aggregation field. So just like here, and then we can group by. So if we just want to group by our ticket ID, as an example, this is just going to return one row for each ticket ID. So if I put another clean here, as you can see, there's a little number next to the ticket ID. This is 89, so that's how many rows there are. If I zoom back out, just before, and then if I bring on a sorry, so if you look up here for the number of rows, we've got 227. And now we've got 89. So this number here shows us how many unique values there are. So that's one way we can use to get rid of duplicates. Obviously, I don't have any data here. So if we had a number, we could then bring through an average as well. So then that could remove any duplicates which would have fields that are the same. So that's one way of doing duplicated data.
Thanks so much for taking us through that. So everyone, thank you for joining us today. Apologies for all the technical glitches that have happened and for me double muting myself and not unmuting myself, so having to repeat a little bit there. So I hope you guys are able to join us tomorrow for our final Tableau Tip battle, which will have a tip freestyle with two of my colleagues, Soha and Ryan. So tomorrow they'll be sharing a whole range of tips and tricks from everything from dates and spatial tips through anything else we haven't covered. So please do join us tomorrow at 1. And I realize we've just gone over time, so wherever in the world you are, I hope you have a good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining. Bye from me, and bye from Jack, Jenny, and Tom.